Great. Good morning, everybody. Steve Grove here, Commissioner of Deed, and welcome to this roundtable on the next Minnesota economy, focused today on broadband internet access, a critical component of growing Minnesota's economy. And we are thrilled to be joined by several leaders in our state to have a thoughtful discussion on this topic and what we can do about making sure the entire state of Minnesota gets connected. I am joined today by my colleague at the Department of Employment and Economic Development, Angie Dickison, who runs our broadband program. She'll be helping moderate this discussion, and a panel of distinguished guests who we'll get to in just a moment that we're really eager to hear from. Really, the purpose of this conversation is to both highlight this issue and its importance, and frankly, for the state to get advice from these leaders on what we should be doing in this space, how Minnesota should be thinking about broadband to make sure that we are leading the country in connecting our state and providing opportunity through this modern day plumbing, if you will, that every household, that every business needs access to high-speed internet. You know, just to give us a little bit of perspective on the state of play in Minnesota before we begin our conversation, we're in a situation right now where about 92% of households and businesses have access to a moderate level of service, but that's not really the level of service that you would want to do, full-scale business development and growth. Only 83% of rural homes and businesses have access to that minimum definition, and 87% of homes and businesses have access overall in the state to that 100 megabytes down, 20 megabytes up service that is really needed to conduct business, to conduct commerce, and to engage with the broader world over internet. So the governor has put $50 million in his budget to expand our grant program to increase those percentages significantly. We have a program in our state that has continued to put money into the market to incentivize telecoms to go into those harder to reach areas. Most recently, we did a grant program of about $20 million for almost 40 projects across the state to grow our broadband footprint. But we need to do a lot more. And it's a great time for this conversation because not only are we in the legislative session debating this issue from a budget perspective in Minnesota, but the federal government has put a lot of money into broadband too. And so we are navigating very unique and optimistic waters on this front and eager to get advice from our panelists today. You know, I don't need to share with everybody here how much the pandemic has changed our lives. We certainly wouldn't be on this Zoom call right now if it weren't for the fact that COVID-19 had been here. We'd be in person. But thanks to broadband, we are able to be in this virtual environment. And so many things have shifted that aren't going to go back. Telehealth has massively shifted in our state's economy. A majority of providers saying they will continue that after this pandemic is through. School, of course, is taking place entirely online, and business too. And one of the things that I think we are focused on at our department is how do you use broadband to get as many new small businesses to grow and to be connected to the internet right from the very start, because that's what leads to a successful business in today's economy. So this is really an economic imperative for our state and something that we are very bullish on and something that we're eager to make major progress on in the coming years. Good news is we have a great program in our state focused on these grants. You'll hear more about that from Angie Dickison. We've been a national leader here, but nothing's inevitable, and it's going to take more work to get there. So we're eager for the discussion today. I'm going to turn over to my colleague Angie Dickison to offer a little bit more information about our program here in Minnesota, and then we'll meet our panelists and dive into our discussion. So Angie, over to you.
Great, thank you, Commissioner. Good morning, everyone. Good to see you all. For folks who may be watching, I'm Angie Dickison. I'm the Executive Director of the Office of Broadband Development at DEED, and I'm thrilled to be having this conversation with you all today. As background, Minnesota has a set of policies and programs that do a number of things to help bring broadband service to areas that lack a robust connectivity option. Minnesota's Office of Broadband Development is charged with encouraging, fostering, developing, and improving broadband access in the state. We map and measure annually where there is service and identify the gaps. This mapping points us to where investment may be needed, and it also helps consumers find what options are available in their area. The Broadband Office works to match communities that are looking for more options with providers in a position to help them achieve their goals, and helps providers address bottlenecks to build new service, such as slow or expensive permitting and right-of-way access issues. And finally, the state has a grant program that is recognized as one of the best in the country that can provide up to 50% matching funds to construct broadband networks in parts of our state that have little or no service available. Since 2014, the Border to Border Broadband Development Grant Program has invested $126 million across Minnesota. These 179 projects have helped connect over 57,000 homes, businesses, and farms. I look forward to our discussion today, and Commissioner, I will turn it back to you.
Great, thanks, Angie. Well, we're certainly lucky to have a national leading program in the state, and a large testament to Angie and her team's leadership and work with the partners you're about to meet. So welcome to our panel. First, I'd like to recognize Bernadine Jocelyn from the Blandin Foundation, who has done a tremendous amount of work in grants and access to broadband. Good morning, Bernadine.
Good morning.
Next, we have Anna Boroff. She's Executive Director of the Minnesota Cable Communications Association, which is the trade association of franchise cable television companies in Minnesota, a major advocate for broadband in our state. Anna, good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Next, we have Matt Woolman, who's the Senior Director of State and Industry Affairs at Land O'Lakes, which has been a major leader in rural broadband, specifically focused on ag, obviously, and Matt was also the former Deputy Commissioner of the Department of Ag here in state government. So, Matt, welcome.
Thank you. Good to see you, Commissioner.
You too. Vince Robinson is the chairman of the Minnesota Rural Broadband Coalition, a really unique collection of members who are fighting for broadband across rural Minnesota, and one of the real secrets to Minnesota's success in this space. Vince, good morning.
Good morning. Happy to be here. Thank you.
Next, we have Mark Johnson. He's the Executive Director of the East Central Minnesota Education Cable Cooperative. That's a lot of words. The acronym is ECMECC. And he also is a major member of our Broadband Task Force, which advises the governor on how to think about broadband policy. This is a great organization founded back in the early 80s, really, that has played a huge role in East Central Minnesota broadband access. So, Mark, welcome.
Good morning. Thank you, Commissioner, for having me, and guests, welcome.
Great. Good to see you. Next, we have Steve Fensky, who's the General Counsel of the Minnesota Association of Townships, and he's also a member of the Broadband Task Force. That Townships Association provides support for local government through education programs, advocacy, collaboration, and work on the local level. Welcome to Steve. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Nice to see everybody this morning.
And last but not least, Brent Christensen, the President and CEO of Minnesota Telecom Alliance, extensive experience in rural telecommunications. As a part of Brent's background, this is a major voice for broadband in our state, and we're thrilled to have Brent with us this morning too.
Good morning, Commissioner. Thanks for having me.
Well, Angie and I will both serve up some questions to let the discussion go, but we'll keep this pretty open. We all know each other here pretty well. We've been fighting on this issue for some time. And maybe just to get us started, Vince, why don't you kick us off and explain to our viewers, why is it so hard to get broadband into these final 10 to 15% of homes and businesses in the state? What is the challenge before us as it relates to getting broadband and internet access in Minnesota?
Well, thank you, Commissioner. Obviously, the biggest challenge is the remoteness of some of these communities and houses and businesses that we are still in need of hooking up. We have a lot of geographic issues associated with reaching them, as well as just the distance between them. So every mile of fiber costs, or any other internet deployment, costs a certain amount per space, and the fewer people we have in those spaces, the more difficult it is to make the financial case for independent service providers to reach them. And that's what makes programs like the state's Border to Border Broadband program so critical, because these service providers cannot afford to do it on their own. But that's really the biggest issue, is the folks that are left to serve are either hollowed out from activities that took place through other expansion programs. So they might be a community that didn't have access available for grant funds at the time that a service provider was putting in service around them. And so they've become what we call a donut hole, where everybody around them is served, but that community, for whatever reason, wasn't able to be served by the provider that went around them. Or they're people that are on the fringes of service territories that, again, it's not financially feasible to reach them. without assistance of programs like either federal programs or the state border-to-border program.
Yeah, I know these grants make a difference. I wonder, just for the group, if anybody would like to chime in on the importance of programs to help the market do what it wouldn't otherwise do. We've got the border-to-border grant program, which we talked about. There's federal dollars too. Talk a bit about these market inefficiencies and what the role of government is in this space.
Commissioner?
Yeah, Mark, please.
Yeah, just something in our area, we have a situation, and Vince described it well, not being able to make a business case in some respects for providers to serve some of our really rural areas outside of our communities. We also have a situation which I think plays into why it's so important that Minnesota has set their goals high for the border-to-border program and the speeds that they would deliver, because some of the past federal programs have set that bar a little bit lower. And so we have situations where we have, large providers who've come in and used some of that federal money to build out service. And you talked about it at the beginning as moderate level of service, which we found out through the pandemic is not really robust enough for people to do things. So it's key that the state and federal is stepping up now better too. But it's key that the state program and those federal programs reach high in terms of those goals and provide those boosts to the providers, because there isn't that business case for them. So it's vital that boost is there for them to be able to consider serving some of these areas. Yeah,
access doesn't matter if you're throwing your phone across the room in frustration because you can't get on at the speed you need to get done what you need to get done. Other thoughts on that issue of the role?
Commissioner, this is Bernadine. I'd like to offer just the reassurance to Minnesota taxpayers that there's a lot of good data out there, that there's a very high return on investment in investment in public access and adoption. We've seen studies out there from different real estate agencies and associations, for example, that rural homes values increase up over 3% with a good fiber connection to it. And that households in rural places without a good robust broadband connection miss out on something like $1,850 a year in economic benefit. So we've seen that both from an individual household perspective and a community perspective, that public funds invested in access and adoption really pay off for Minnesota.
Yeah, it increases the tax base, home values, opportunity. I wonder, Anna, maybe to bring you into the conversation, there was a time maybe where people thought of broadband as like, oh, that's just so you can watch Netflix or something, or, it's good for streaming, or it's more of an entertainment component. Make the economic case for this from an economic development standpoint, from your perspective. What is the reason why this is so foundational for an economy that works?
Well, I think that's exactly right. We are seeing higher demand for speeds across the state. And I think, in part because of our strong partnership with the state and the Office of Broadband, who have been just really great partners to us, I think you'll see that providers have been willing to look at, state programs, federal programs, and also have committed just a lot of their own private capital to making these investments, not only to areas that are unserved, but to areas, I'm thinking last week, Midco, a rural broadband provider in Minnesota, just announced, a huge expansion in northern Minnesota. So Ely, International Falls, Tower, Sudan, Babbitt, these are communities that are certainly not, around the metro and are going to be getting speeds for broadband that are 5 gig right now, capable of 10 gig in the future. So I think you're seeing the demand for those speeds really drive economic investment across the state, both by providers and the businesses who want those speeds.
Yeah, no question. Matt, I wondered from the ag perspective, this is something you spent your career on in the public and private sector. And we have a nation-leading agriculture economy here in the state. Tell us about how farmers are thinking about this issue and how you at Land O'Lakes are approaching it.
Yeah, thank you. It is so critical to have good broadband connectivity as well as speeds in rural communities. And, as has been mentioned here today, I think things have shifted. And it's not just a luxury anymore. It's absolutely necessary to have this connectivity. And that's no different in agriculture or in rural communities. You think about some of the advances around precision agriculture how are we going to address climate and water quality issues. We're doing that through technology and deploying those technologies out there on the acre to make better choices about how we're applying nutrients and those types of things. Everything to robotic milkers, to manufacturing facilities, et cetera. The vitality of these rural communities is absolutely critical to the success of our ag economy here in Minnesota as well as across the country. And broadband is a central pillar of that. Without connectivity, we don't have that connection to the world to be able to participate in that economy, which is becoming more and more global and interconnected every day. So connectivity is critical to Minnesota's future and to those rural communities as well.
Matt, why aren't cell phone networks enough? Why isn't it okay just to use your cell phone network and tether, or what is it that we need about broadband that's different for our?
Well, it's about speeds, and we need those upload and download speeds, and right now we have members that we've had conversations with where they're going out to the tractor and they're collecting data off of their equipment, and then have to drive it into town to load it up and make use of that data. And so it's about being able to have the connectivity, number one, and two, to have the kinds of speeds that we need to use the data in a way that's productive.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And cost too. I mean, once you have it at scale, you see some major cost savings, I would think, from broadband too, compared to cell networks.
Yeah, absolutely. And I look at this issue as kind of this is the Rural Electrification Act of the 1930s in a lot of ways. And sometimes, and it's been mentioned here already, that it's not going to make sense economically sometimes for some of those sparse areas, but it's so critical that we have to figure out a way to do that. And your office and the Office of Broadband Development have absolutely been critical in helping to kind of tip the scales economically. And those federal investments are going to be critical as well. And we've at Land O'Lakes, we pulled together 145 major companies, trade associations, and others from across the country, and we're working very hard to close this digital divide. Not because it's critical just for our company and our rural communities that we serve, but thinking even broader than that around healthcare outcomes and education outcomes, workforce development and the like. I mean, this is not just a rural or an urban issue. This is a national security issue, from a food issue to an economic development issue, an equity issue. It cuts across all of those spectrums.
It really does. And I think we're lucky to have companies like Land O'Lakes in Minnesota that are able to lead the way on this. Your colleague, obviously, Teddy Kelly, being the chair of our task force for broadband, it just it makes a difference to have strong public voices. Of course, Beth Ford as well, a national leader in this space. So we're grateful for that. We got a question from a member of the press, Tasha Riddell, who's on, and her question is, what percentage of rural Minnesota would you say is not adequately connected to broadband, speed-wise, infrastructure, et cetera? Angie, maybe I'll direct that question to you.
I'm happy to answer it. Thank you, Commissioner. Our data shows that 83% of our households, our rural households, have access to that 20 22 speed goal of 25 by 3. So you could say 17% of our rural households lack access at that lower speed goal level, and 27% of our rural households lack access to that 2026 goal of a 100 by 20 service. And thank you for that question, Tasha. And that's a good segue into something that we've been talking about at DEED in terms of technology and what's on the horizon. And I would open that up to the group if anyone would like to talk about what other technology we should perhaps be aware of or looking at as we try to close this gap in our state.
I could maybe jump in on that. Thank you, Angie, because that's a great point. I do think it's going to take a variety of technologies to connect all of those areas. And I think about the areas of the state, maybe plowing through granite, fiber through granite maybe is going to be really daunting in terms of cost. So, technologies like fixed wireless that are providing really high speeds and have seen some really great success across the state. I think just being open-minded on some of those technologies with the goal of getting everyone, connected to broadband. I don't think folks care as much about where their broadband comes from as long as it works well and delivers the service that they expect. So I think from providers as well, I think we're open to using a variety of technologies to connect folks, whether it's through our traditional cable networks or fiber or fixed wireless or, satellite has been a part of federal programs this time around. So all of those might be really worth thinking about.
And this, may I add something?
Thank you for that, Anna. Yes, Mark, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. And I will add to that comment is making sure, because what I talked about before was setting our goals high and setting our sights high. And I know the discussion about speeds, upload and download speeds came to, I think Matthew talked about that. We talk about in circles and within the broadband task force and in other circles, we talk about download and upload, and we talk about download as consuming of information, and we talk about upload as productivity. And I know Matthew talked about the farmers out on their tractors and having to get that information back up, right? And so with some of these other technologies, and there are some very promising technologies out there. There are improvements in fixed wireless that are very promising. There are improvements in satellite that are very promising. But I want to caution all of us, and in talking about still the importance of those state programs and that state funding and setting those goals high, that we have to watch that technology is capable of bringing, first-class service to folks, and that it's not second-class service that some folks end up with. And it's that upload speed is that key indicator of, are we able to be productive with that access that we have. So there are some, again, very promising technologies out there, and it's going to take those to reach those final, percentages of folks, but we also want them to have a first-class service as well.
And this is Vince, just to add to that, we talk a lot about speed, but latency and reliable connectivity are extremely important in that conversation as we talk about technologies. So speed isn't everything if you can only get that speed at times that you don't need it for your business. And I'll give you an example of that. When you're trying to do a credit card transaction and you have a latency issue and you time out on that credit card transaction, all of a sudden you have a major problem in not knowing if that transaction went through or not. And you might try and run it again, and then your customer has 2 charges instead of 1. That's just one small example of how rural businesses, have to struggle with lack of connectivity and accessibility and some of the latency issues that they're, currently facing with the provider systems that they have right now.
I'm gonna add here, when we hear about new technology, sometimes there's the idea that, something better is coming. And we just keep pushing the time period out. There is a lot of viable technologies that we have right now. So when we talk to townships, they're usually saying, well, there may be something coming, but we want something now. We wanted something a decade ago. So I do get a little concerned when we start talking new technologies that we're saying, let's push it off. There's a lot of stuff that'll work pretty well now. I did hear recently the satellite, the Starlink system. In this, we've talked about speeds and latency and this stuff, but there's also an affordability factor here. The folks that we've talked to who have adopted this as a means to get something for now, they call it kind of the best we can get right now. You know, it's maybe not the best, but it may work for now. And it's perceived to be pretty expensive. There's some heavy upfront costs and about $100 a month. And that's difficult for some to swallow, especially knowing what folks in urban areas pay. And they want to kind of be treated the same. They want that same market once they do adopt. And I think those are important factors that other technologies may be cheaper, including fixed wireless or wireline.
I think just for like oh, sorry, Bernie, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I really appreciate Steve bringing up the issue of affordability. And as you know, as public policy, our leaders look for solutions and how in Minnesota we want to make sure that everybody has access to the internet and the skills to use it. We have to keep in mind the challenge of making it affordable. And I'm really glad that at policy tables in Minnesota and in Washington now we're talking about that and recognizing that if you've got access but you can't afford to use it, you really haven't solved the problem.
Yeah, no question. And we've seen federal programs bring in subsidies for certain parts of the state for certain income levels, which are exciting. I think, are you also referring to competition more broadly as just a natural way to drive price down too?
So, yeah, I mean, clearly we see in communities that are served by 2 or more providers tend to have more competitive pricing. But I think that the COVID pandemic has brought into the discussion this element of consumer affordability in a way that we really haven't talked about in the past. We've been more focused on affordability from a provider perspective. I think that's absolutely makes sense and understandable. If it's, you know, if it was affordable to be built, if it was profitable, it would have been built. And so what we're really dealing with now are those areas that do require a public policy solution to get built. But at the same time, our end goal as a state is to ensure that Minnesotans have the access, the skills to use it, and can afford it at home. So I think the task for the Governor's Broadband Task Force this year is again also going to be looking at what can we do as a state to help resolve this challenge to ensure that access is affordable for all residents of the state.
Yeah, we mentioned satellite. I'm curious, just for a show of hands, who's bullish on satellite? Who thinks it's got a future? Folks ready to raise their hands? Still verdict out? I'll put my hand up. I'm pretty bullish, but you know, there's a lot for us to learn about this, and some exciting projects out there with SpaceX, with Amazon, others. I mean, we're going to find out. Brent, I think you were about to say something. Yeah, let's go to you.
Yeah, sorry. Well, I just had a couple points. Well, first of all, my wife says I can't go 20 minutes without talking, and it's 22, so I'm pretty excited. I'm not gonna lie. Just to kind of build upon some of the discussion that's happened here. I've been in this business for 25 years, both as a provider and as a representative of providers. I've never had a customer come to me and say, I need this speed. They've come to me and say, I need my things to work. And so the focus on speed, I get you have to do that from a policy perspective, but you need to understand that customers don't care. They just want to have it and they want it to work. To Anna's point, there's a lot of technologies out there that are being used. My company, I've got 1,200 subscribers. I've got fiber, I've got copper, I've got fixed wireless. We're doing what it takes to get service to those customers. And that's pretty much the same throughout the membership of MTA. I just real quickly, we've done some number calculating. You know, you talked about the federal dollars. There is for about a 12-year period of time, $1.2 billion coming into Minnesota through the different federal programs. My members alone, and that's just the traditional telephone companies, last year invested $196.9 million into their networks in CapEx expenses. They're projecting over $244 million next year, on top of the federal money that's coming in. That's what it costs to maintain the network, not necessarily just expand it. And what we've worked on with the Office of Broadband Development since the very beginning of this grant program, and it took us a little bit, it took us a couple of years to get this right, but I think we've got it right, where we dialed in the federal dollars and the state dollars to work together to get better speeds to more people. And that's really what that program is. And that's why that program is so important to Minnesota, and it's so, it's used as the Minnesota model throughout the country. And then the last point I'd make to Bernadine, and I absolutely agree with everything she said. When this pandemic started, I was like everybody else. I thought the only reason someone didn't have internet or broadband at their home because they couldn't afford it. And now we can debate affordability. I mean, when you're spending $160 on cell phone bills, you can't pay $50 for internet. That's not affordable. We can have that conversation. But the thing that surprised me the most when this pandemic broke were the number of people that called in and signed up for service that never had it before. We have Lifeline programs. We have different programs that we can offer. They weren't looking for any of that. They didn't have it at home for whatever reason. They used their cell phones. They didn't use it, they didn't need it. But as soon as the pandemic broke and they had to start working from home or doing e-learning, then all of a sudden they needed to have it. So I think that was a big aha moment for me, to just find out that there were a lot of people that didn't have it. And affordability, now, don't get me wrong, there are things that we need to do to help those that can't afford it, but there was a lot more people out there that just didn't have it than I was aware of.
No, it's a great point, Brent. What would you say is the difference maker in Minnesota's position here? Do we have the right ingredients in our state's broadband program, or maybe what are some advice that you or others would give us on strengthening our program in the state?
Well, I was part of the stakeholder group, and many of you were too, when this all started, and we spent a lot of time on the rules around the program. And I think that investment on the front end has helped us and made us being successful. Nobody wants to, the goal here, we all have the same goal. We just have some different ideas on how to get there. The goal is border to border broadband. Everybody in Minnesota has broadband. The way to get that is to make sure that we focus on those people that have nothing today and not overbuild networks that already exist or give higher speeds. Everybody's got to have a car before some people have a Cadillac, that kind of mentality. And we've figured that out. So honestly, I oppose any kind of changes to the rules that we have come up, because we've spent a lot of time working on them and they work, and we've proven they've worked. And so we just need to, you and I've had this conversation many times. You know where I'm coming from. We need funding for both years of the biennium so that we can plan for projects and communities can plan for projects for the second year. Beyond that, I'm happy with whatever amount that the government settles on to keep the project going. So I do not have any suggested changes, and I think we've got a time-proven program that uses private investment, federal dollars, and dials that in to move this needle faster.
Commissioner, one new element about in the Minnesota model that the Governor's Broadband Task Force recommended this year for the first time is public investment in adoption. We've talked about that today, how important that is. My colleague Bill Coleman, who many of you know, works with us in community broadband across rural Minnesota, often equates broadband infrastructure to the exercise bike in his basement. And he says, it doesn't do me any good unless I get on and use it. And so if you don't use the infrastructure and get the benefits from it, it's no good. And I think the pandemic has underscored the importance of people having the ability to use, not only access, but the ability to use the internet. And so for the first time this last year, the Governor's Broadband Task Force recommended an investment by state government in adoption efforts. And so I'm a strong proponent of that. And I think, and I hope that the legislature does take a look at that recommendation and think that that would enhance the investments that we're making as a state in the infrastructure itself.
Thank you for that, Bernadine. I appreciate those comments. It's actually another good segue to a question I wanted to pose to Mark. With your experience discuss your work with digital navigators and how those folks have helped some of our communities during the pandemic.
Sure. Thank you, Angie. Yeah, we stood up a program. Okay, so I work with schools, right? We have 14 member school districts and one community and technical college that are part of ECMEC, my organization. You know, the pandemic, obviously, right, identified very quickly many of the things that you heard talking about. You know, Brent talked about the number of people who just didn't have access before, and Bernadine and others have brought up the affordability issue, and we saw all of that, right, within the schools immediately as we had to transition on a dime, you know, to distance learning as we closed access to the in-person learning. So very quickly, we identified that we needed to help families with that process. And this speaks, like Angie said, this speaks very much to that idea of adoption and helping people adopt. We had to work with the families on what are your options, what is available to you, and you know, had families who had access to great options, but just didn't know it, didn't know that was available to them. We had to educate them on a number of things. And so we stood up a process or a program called Digital Navigators, and it was based on something from the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, the NDIA. And we were lucky to secure some funding through a partnership for Connected Minnesota, which was a state and private partnership. And we took that and we trained navigators, we called them digital navigators, within each of our districts, whose sole purpose, or one of their purposes for this project, was to reach out to families and help them get the access that they needed. Whether that meant signing up for a service that was already available to them, whether that meant one of these newer technologies that on an experiment, we had people actually sign up for the Starlink SpaceX program because that was all that they had available to them. Whether it meant bringing hotspots for cell service to their location, to their home so that they could use it, which, by the way, is not always the answer, but it's sometimes a good option. And then we worked to understand what were the issues they were having. Were they technical issues? We helped them with that. Were they affordability issues? You know, we helped them with that through various programs that were made available to schools through both providers and through funding that came from the federal, some of the federal funding and state funding that was available. We looked at other factors that were causing them, mental health issues, housing insecurity issues, made sure that, you know, through the schools they were receiving meals, all of those kinds of things. They fell into the auspices of the digital navigators. We also trained our library personnel in our branch East Central Regional Library System so that they could reach out to community members too. It was a very exciting project, very impactful project. But it was that one-on-one connection with those folks, and that really speaks to both affordability, lots of issues, affordability, adoption, and education of what's available and what families need to be successful. And I think that we indirectly, we also reached those families who had folks working from home, who had been forced into their homes and were working from home, and especially through the libraries. So it was a very exciting project. I hope that tells you a little bit about what it was we did. So thank you for that opportunity.
Thank you for sharing that, Mark. I love hearing that story and about your experience there. We'll open it up to the group a bit here as we've got a few minutes left here. I'm going to be sensitive to the time, but as a part of the stimulus in December, an emergency broadband benefit was announced, and would love to hear thoughts from the group on how best the state could help promote that program, and what else we could be doing through the office to help support communities that are now going to receive funding that they may potentially be able to use for broadband infrastructure and investments. I will open that back up to the group.
Well, I'll jump in as we work with township governments. Township governments are small and they're typically not the drivers of putting in broadband infrastructure, but we have some examples of where they've worked with providers. And that might be something that those folks are going to want to know. How do we interface with providers? What do we need to do? And that's something maybe the office can help with. What are the options? What are the expectations? At this time around, we have more time to use the money than we did with the CARES Act, and we're really happy about that, because that was one of the reasons it was suggested we couldn't use it for broadband before. We couldn't complete projects in time. I think we have till 2024 this time around. And I think that gives us some opportunity to create a plan, kind of as Brent was saying, a longer term plan over biennium, over 3 years, and see what we can do with this and with the state's program.
You know, if you look at where we are compared to other states, we're so far ahead just because we have OBD. We have an established grant process. We can process whatever money comes into the state through an existing program, an existing office, an existing way. So we are in a very good place to maximize this and spur investment. You know, one of the reasons that, you know, at least for my members, we're upgrading our networks constantly. That's why we're spending millions and millions of dollars of our own money. It's a constant evolution. Broadband's going to improve all by itself. If we all sat back and did nothing, broadband will improve. It has no choice. It's a living entity. It's going to grow. What we can do with federal money and state money is we can move that needle faster, and we can move it farther. And that's what we have to do collectively as a group, whether it's the task force or the coalition or the cable association, or the telephone association, or the schools. We all have to collectively agree on a goal, which we have done, and then we have to move forward to that. And somebody's got to steer that ship. Or I'm going to say we're all rowing the boat, but somebody's got to steer that ship. And we are unbelievably blessed in Minnesota to have the foresight to have the Office of Broadband Development, to have Angie and her team that are doing it, to have Commissioner Grove, who is empowering them to do their jobs and get us to where we got to go. So I think we're much better off than other states are. So we're in a position to get this done.
And I couldn't agree with that more with what Brent said, and Steve too. And what I would say, you know, to look at, and for the Office of Broadband to look at, is just that coordination piece of all of these funds that are out there floating around, and making sure that the communities know about what those options are. And that was kind of said, I think Steve kind of said that, you know, make sure everybody knows what their options are. And then, you know, laser focus that on those areas that currently are not served. You know, the 18% that you mentioned, Angie, about, you know, that don't have even the 25/3 service, and then the 27%, you know, that don't have the higher level of service, so that we make sure that those funds are going to those places that absolutely need it. I mean, I think that's paramount. You know, in education, we talk about when we have 5 or 10% of our kids that are struggling and getting left behind, that bothers us greatly. Well, you know, because some people you say 18%, well, that's not that many. No, that should bother us. That's a large number. And a big part of our, you know, of our economy. So we need to make sure that we get to those folks.
You know, the other part on top of this, just in addition to this, it's more than just the money. Okay, we've got 2 huge things working against us. You can pile all the money you want on us right now, and we still can't get it done. We've got a short construction season, and we have supply chain issues. We're not getting equipment. So, and then there are also permitting and right-of-way issues that have been disastrous. I mean, it takes MnDOT anywhere from 12 to 18 weeks to approve a permit. Well, we've shortened that time down immensely because of the work that OBD has done and busted down the silos. So there's a lot more than just money here that has to be dealt with, and very, very fortunate to have the support that we do.
And Angie, thank you for the question about the role. And one thing I just wanted to mention is the opportunity to collaborate maybe in new ways with Minnesota Housing as they try to establish some of their new protocols with housing assistance programs through the federal COVID packages, and the opportunity to bundle subscriptions. I think how this is new housing, you know, the EBB program that you talked about, emergency broadband benefit, that there may be ways that the state and the office could play a role in helping public housing managers interface with their residents to ensure that those benefits are accessible to them.
I'd just like to jump in. Brent and Steve and Mark, Bernadine, all really great points. And Mark, to your point, focusing on those communities and those areas that are not connected today is absolutely paramount. And one of the things that we've seen and heard as we've convened this coalition and have worked with many of you as partners in this effort is some of these rural communities and other communities may not have the capacity and the readiness to build out the strategy and know where to come and get the funding, and working with the broadband office and our federal partners and others. So I think that is a need that's out there, frankly, is how do we provide some community capacity in those rural communities where they need to build out that strategy and so forth.
That's a great point. This has been a great kind of explanation of the challenges and the opportunities that we uniquely face in Minnesota. I'm curious if folks here think we could be the first state in the country, if we play it right, to get to 100%. Is that a legitimate goal for us to set for ourselves?
Well, at the risk of being a naysayer, you have to understand, telephone service throughout the state of Minnesota only got up to 98%. There was never 100% coverage of landline telephone service back before cells and everything else. So it's a laudable goal, and I certainly think it's the one that we need to be striving for. But realistically, you're not going to have 100%. I mean,
well, I would liken that a little bit to unemployment. I mean, when you get to 3% unemployment, you say that you're at full employment. And I think the same is true here. At what time do you consider it to be 100%? I don't think it's realistic, like Brent said, to ever reach that, every household is served. But at some point, we can't lose sight of, we want everyone to at least have the opportunity to be served. And whether they choose to, whether, it's affordable or not, that remains to be seen where that level is. But we have to keep striving for that. We have to keep working towards it. Pardon?
Sorry. I was just going to say, I think the goal, instead of 100%, should be every Minnesotan should have access to quality broadband that they need to live their lives.
Yeah, access maybe is the right word versus actual connections, but I'll tell you, we're bullish. There's challenges. We've mentioned them here with the geography, the seasonality. We've got a good program. We have an amazing network of partners and leaders in our state that are pushing for this, and this is the moment. And I think we're definitely feeling that Minnesota needs to meet this moment with the right kind of state support, thoughtful, partnerships with our federal government and pulling those dollars down, and then this network that you've all built together over a decade to create an extraordinary government and private sector partnership here that we think does set Minnesota apart. So we're just really grateful for this. Angie and I are thrilled to be able to talk with you all about this topic. We're going to keep fighting for this, both in the legislature, but also as we look at additional federal dollars coming in, and we're going to all do this together. So thanks for joining us today. Angie, any last thoughts for the group before we wrap today?
Last thoughts are to thank you all for your energy and your support and for everything that you've done for our state. I know I'm coming in on the heels of the great work of a lot of wonderful people who came before me. So it's my honor to carry the torch and get us to that finish line. And again, thank you for your input, and look forward to working with you over the next year. So thank you.
Great. Well, thanks everybody. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thanks, everyone.